All right, so I think people are really going to enjoy this conversation. So we have Yann Brandt, who's the CEO of FTC Solar. He's a industry veteran. He's been in the solar space for a long time. Had a lot of interesting things to say about where we are here in the end of 2024 and sort of the political climate, but also kind of looking back at the history of the industry and how that kind of informs where we might be heading from a market perspective, from a policy perspective. So lots of good stuff in there.
Right. Having somebody like Yann around for 20 years in the industry who can see the evolution of the solar space and see how the storage space is evolving in exactly the same way. We expect the market forecast for storage to grow and expand really quickly. So his insights on how we think that industry is going to change quickly are very interesting.
Yeah,
today.
And then you add in kind of the global landscape too. He had a lot. FTC has a big global presence, and as a U.S. manufacturer with business in other countries, sort of interesting ideas around the role of the U.S. market in a global solar context. And I think coming off of your trip with Abby to Baku and sort of the how we can show up as a U.S. industry in global conversations. So lots to dig into there.
Yep, a lot of things to learn from this conversation.
Well, I'm Yann Brandt. I'm the president CEO of FTC Solar, which is a tracking manufacturing OEM based here in the U.S. I've been in solar industry now. This is going on to my 19th year.
Wow.
And I've done a little bit of everything in the solar industry, starting off in C&I. I even stint in residential and several stints in utility scale. Our focus today here with FTC is utility scale trackers. And it's a company that went public 4 years ago now. And, just continuing the trend of building innovative technology, building factories here and expanding factories here in the U.S. Amongst a global landscape of solar deployment, but very much focused in the U.S. I've now been on the CEO board for a year and a half, originally with a company called FlexGen, which was an energy storage software and services company. And recently joined FTC about 4 months ago.
You mentioned sort of FTC's place in a global marketplace. So what is your sort of vision, I guess maybe looking both backwards and forwards, the role of the US market versus the global market for FTC, in the last 5 years, maybe next 5 years? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, look, fundamentally, it always comes down to most solar companies, and FTC Solar included, are anchored by the demand for solar energy growth in the U.S. It allows companies to invest. It's the most valuable, total company value that is created is based on the growth of the U.S. market. And it's, and all of the investments that companies make, like our investments into our joint ventures or expanding our factory in Houston, it's based on what we think is going to happen based on the demand in the U.S. All of the demand that happens in Europe or in Africa or Australia is underpinned by the strength and comfort we have on the demand for more solar in the U.S.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear. I hope that continues.
Absolutely.
How are you thinking about demand right now, given the change in the political landscape?
Look, having been in solar as long as I've been, I've seen a little bit of everything. And I'll say the same thing to you that and to the listeners that I do to the analysts is I've seen the ITC, the solar tax credit, be extended by presidents and Congress of both parties. Mixtures, right? The original 10% to 30% happened in second George Bush term, pre-Obama. But as I've also seen duties and tariffs and, sort of the domestic manufacturing policy landscape change under presidents of, White House of both parties. At the core of it, the demand for solar is almost universal. It pulls as high as anyone as any other issue. If you ask most homeowners, would you like solar on your house? Do you want solar on your house or your business? The answer is usually yes. No one really says, no, I don't like the energy that I get from solar. They have, where they come, but it's not a fundamentally political issue. Where we sit today in the landscape, obviously for the first time in a long time, we have growth in demand for electricity, right? The AI boom, the electrification in transportation, in the homes, in businesses, plus all the sort of corporate views on wanting cleaner and more reliable energy. Those are fundamentally economics, issues around economics. And so the growth is there. Solar is the fastest, easiest, cheapest to deploy, especially now with energy storage prices plummeting and just becoming much more reliable. So I feel really good about where we are. Look, the solar industry is no different than any other economic sector. What we look for is stability, right? Do we know what the landscape is for the investments that companies like FTC are making or other companies are making based on predictable rules of capitalism, right? Like free market with the rules that Congress and state regulators put in place. Give us a good spot. That's ultimately what I look for from political leaders is, separate. I always try to celebrate politics from policy because ultimately policy is designed to move rather slowly. Can we eliminate the noise of the politics in the meantime? I think we found ourselves in a really good spot in terms of the tax credits, the transferability, the 45X credits. Those have incentivized a lot of this rush to domestic manufacturing. And I think that's a really good spot. Obviously we're, as a company, are moving alongside of our peers to having 100% domestic content capabilities. And that's really good, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And if we start to push and pull the rules of the road, it's going to make people pause and step back.
Right. I mean, it takes years and years and years to get to the place where the United States is right now in terms of deployment and domestic manufacturing. And, even our friends down the street at the Big Oil and Gas Trade Association talk about the need for diverse sources of energy to meet grid demand. You mentioned AI and data centers. Crypto is a big demand driver. Do you agree with the fact that we can't turn back time in terms of our moving forward and continuing to see momentum in the renewable energy space?
No, I mean, and it goes even farther. I've always, there's a lot of conversation around what is energy transition. And usually it's some concept of moving from fossil fuels to clean energy. And I've never quite agreed with it. I've always said the energy transition is a move towards electrification. And that's kind of where we're at, right? So when you think about electrification, it means, the energy we need for data centers, the energy we need for the cars that we drive. We used to go to the gas station, and some people do, and they put energy in their car in the form of a liquid fuel. Some people charge their cars at a Tesla supercharger or at their house, and same amount of energy goes into the car, but it's just in an electron format. When I see a tanker truck driving on the road, I tell my kids, look, that's a battery, right? It's a storage of energy in just a different format. Look, if we have a demand for energy, if we don't deliver that energy capacity, and this is not just it's a state by state issue. If one utility can get more energy and power built into the grid by building transmission and investing in, getting more capacity on the ground, data centers will flock there. But it's also true at the country level. If we as a country don't meet the demand for the electricity that the country needs and that economic growth wants, we're going to hamper economic growth. And we're going to cede not just the leadership that we have in moving towards cleaner, more reliable grids, but we're also going to seed AI to other countries that build out more energy infrastructure. And, solar fundamentally, you can, like, if you want to carve out its cleaner part for a moment and just think about it, it's a very predictable energy form, predictable at a cost level, right? Oil and gas has fluctuations. There's volatility. It has some benefits to, the power density that it can create. But ultimately, when you make a 25-year investment, only solar can give you a locked-in price for that period of time. So if you're trying to get 80% of your cost for your data center locked in for that length of an investment, that's what we mean by it's cleaner, cheaper, more reliable. You match that with batteries, and you match that with other fuels that are available based on what region you're in. You end up with a better portfolio of assets. But look, I don't want to understate how important it is. The economy is saying we want more power, we want more electricity. Solar's here to meet that, right? And all of us that are in the supply chain to do that are meeting that, including the goals of building more domestic manufacturing. But if we don't provide more power and more energy, then those data centers are going to go elsewhere, because data does flow across. It's very hard to create tariffs and duties and sort of do country by country rules. AI is going to be met with where energy is available. That's their most important footprint. And I think the U.S. is in a good spot for it, but it means we have to continue to invest.
You're active in 10 countries. And you mentioned that, it's not just demand, wanting more energy, it's a matter of needing, because Americans have electrified their lives, as you've articulated. How do you think the demand for energy is translating outside the U.S.? When you think about your growth trajectory as a company and your revenue goals, how do you think about business development outside the United States?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first thing I look at, and I'm new to FTC, and it's a unique moment in time because the markets really have gotten so much bigger. I remember when I got into solar, my first project I ever sold was 25 kilowatts, right, for a car dealership. And the idea of a 1 megawatt system, 10 megawatts, I mean, now we put out quotes for 100, 200, 300, 700, right, these giant solar farms. But I'll give you an anecdote. I was at a show in Europe, and a large owner of distribution centers, we're talking to cabinet level secretary of one of the countries. And we're just kind of talking about what are the needs, right? Because when the politics end, there's a conversation of people of trying to figure out where's opportunities to move things in the right direction. And the real estate owner said, look, regardless of what I want as a property owner, my goal is to get as many tenants into my properties for as long as possible for the highest lease rate possible. None of my tenants will sign an extension for a lease in my properties if I don't build them charging stations, because all of the trucks that they're having to move goods and their goods around that they're coming to my distribution center with, they're all going to be electric. So while they're sitting there waiting to get loaded and unloaded, they need to be able to charge. The problem is with distribution centers, usually they haven't had much energy demand besides lighting and a little bit of AC. And now they find themselves in this grid problem where there isn't a grid services. So they went out and they asked for, we need a 5 megawatt interconnect. And utilities everywhere said no, because it wasn't part of the plan. The problem is that if you don't provide energy to, in this instance, the distribution centers, then there won't be tenants, right? Which means that there won't be jobs.
Right.
And there won't be the truck drivers, the products delivered, the truck drivers that come to look at the local economy and to participate in it. Energy is at the center of all of it. If we want economic growth to continue, and that's what we look at globally, right? Is, which countries are seeing the growth trajectory. Because fundamentally for us, if we're going into a new market, doing the first couple projects isn't profitable because establishing a presence, establishing a supply chain, establishing logistics, it requires recoupment of that investment. So it needs to be sustainable. And if it's a stop and go market, then it's not going to be for us. It's likely going to be, countries that have lower cost burdens on being able to establish sort of good business practices. And so we've already made the decision to not participate in some markets because of the stop and go effort. And obviously it's something we're concerned about in all the markets we're in, but the bigger the market, the less impact politics and policy can play into it. But it's certainly something we're always concerned about.
It almost feels like it's fair to say that the economy can't grow without solar and wind. Yeah. Because to your point about going in for a distribution center and needing and requiring a certain base load of energy in order to even run, for the utility to say no is an important key point. And that's a message that I think the Trump administration, that all the new members of Congress need to hear in order for us to continue to expand our not just our national economy, but our local economies. It's just a key point.
Energy at the heart of it all.
Yeah. Look, solar's having grown up in it, just when you look at the numbers from 2006 when I did my first project to now, it's so many things that play into it, right? We talk about energy and electrons and the system size. It's an interesting market because it's very scalable, right? I've written about this in my Solar Wake Up newsletter many times, is the real estate, the naked roofs, right? Every time you land at an airport, the giant distribution centers just completely empty, right? We should be using that, right? That's wasted land for more energy production at the core of the infrastructure. But, even though the end product is producing electrons and helping the economy grow, solar itself is its own economic ecosystem. It's not just the factories that companies like FTC employ people in, or, obviously we buy steel from steel suppliers or electronics from electronics and semiconductor companies. But it's also the lawyers and the bankers, right? It's a flow of tens of billions of dollars. And almost every solar project requires $2 for every dollar invested, because there's the construction period, and then there's the ownership period, and then those projects end up flipping hands a few times. So it's this giant economic driver that probably controls hundreds of billions of dollars of total investment now. And it's not just a cute solar thing anymore, right? Like in 2008, we were all fighting for renewable portfolio standards and having a 2% carve out for solar. Solar is 50% of the annual capacity put on the grid now?
That's right.
And think of that in dollars. It's a big thing. And this, to the extent that elected leaders are listening, it's not just in DC or just in New York. It's everywhere, right? Like every single congressional district. And if you think about it, I always loved one of my favorite statistics was there was a moment in time where the most solar per capita was in Nancy Pelosi's district when she was speaker, and the most solar in total aggregate was in the minority leader's district, Kevin McCarthy. But that's solar, right? It's fundamentally bipartisan.
That's right.
And same on the job side, right? The jobs are in every single disaggregated congressional district across the country.
Well, so harnessing that, what you just mentioned, you've been doing this a long time, and I think you articulated kind of the difference between the politics and the policy, and the slow moving nature of the policy having a direct impact on sort of business certainty. But then there's the politics side where you have to kind of play in the sandbox of all the other things that are going on in Washington or in state capitals. Do you think that there's been a change in how our industry shows up in both the politics and the policy? I feel like you're well versed in this language yourself, but do you see more people plugging into that conversation and understanding the role that they have to play in communicating with lawmakers or sort of building those bridges? Are we growing up as an industry that needs to engage in more political discussions?
So I'll tell you how I feel about, and these are all things I've quote unquote, borrowed the terms from other people. Fundamentally, politics is not a spectator sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's full contact, right? Like, so if you don't participate in politics, what is it? If you're not at the meal, you're on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and it's going to be, and especially in a year where we're doing a budget and the tax extenders,
Mm-hmm.
it's fundamentally a political year in
Mm-hmm.
terms of driving a lot of policy.
Mm-hmm.
These giant omnibus bills are going to happen this year. You better show up.
Mm-hmm.
It's, one of the reasons why I've always been involved with the politics of it. I fundamentally like it. The education part, the access, some people think of elected officials as untouchable. I only see them on TV, but like, you can talk to your mayors and your commissioners and your state representatives and your state senators,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to your congressional leaders, and have real conversations. And the funny thing is as you go through your career, you start meeting people again as they've been elevated,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I was walking the halls of the state capitol in Florida back in 2000, 2008. A lot of those same people are still in politics,
Mm-hmm.
just
At a different
in
level.
leadership roles.
Yeah.
in different roles, right? And now they have their own airplanes. And so you have definitely some growth that happens on that standpoint. But there's also an education, and it kind of makes you realize that not all politics is negative. People need to understand what the impact is, but it's important for all of us to show up. And I'm talking to other CEOs and C-suite executives in the solar industry, physically showing up,
Mm-hmm.
Being at SEIA board meetings or trade association board meetings, state trade association board meetings, going to walk to state capitals, walking, making sure you have relationships with mayors and congressmen and congressional representatives. But, like the thing I always tell other CEOs in the solar industry is you're missing out on one of the best business development opportunities when you don't do, government affairs, right? Like there's as much inter-solar business that happens at trade association events than it does at a trade show. Like, why are you not taking advantage of this? And the more that we have people that are, we're in budget season, are in control of budgets and budget priorities, and that understand that politics is business development, that government affairs is business development, not just for you, but also the teams that you put into place to do it. Like they should be marketing and creating lead opportunities, whether it's RFPs with, school districts, et cetera. And we've seen a lot of financial success based on doing politics and doing, writing policy. We don't have to go that far to, look at the oil and gas industry. They're very good at business because they're very good at politics. Mm-hmm. But they show up with the business checkbook and they show up with the personal checkbook. We don't do that part of it well. We have an easier story to tell. But this has been always and I'll get wonky here for a second.
Please do.
Yeah, that's what this is for.
Everyone in solar knows, we have a tax credit and there's the passive income, rules around the tax code. And if you actually look at the tax code that says, if you invest into a passive investment into these tax benefits in order to be eligible for passive losses, and I'm not a tax lawyer, so I'm butchering this for those listening on that are tax lawyers. You have to have passive income to offset those passive losses.
Right.
If you read that portion of the IRS code or the congressional code, it actually says, except for oil and gas. And I've always said that the easiest and most beneficial tax code change that solar could do is say, and solar, or comma, solar and gas, right? Oil, comma, solar and gas.
Just a few characters.
Uh-huh.
That's just the politics of it, right? If you just change these little words, which literally would probably be a senior staffer in the House Ways and Means Committee, right? Like, but we have to show up. We have to write more checks. Like SEIA budget obviously has come a long way since I've gotten into the solar industry, but it's still less than the marketing budget, like, I don't know, the Natural Gas Association and certainly EEI and things like that. But we're on the right track. But I'd love to see more C-suite executives showing up. I'd love to see more people putting their money into the SEIA PAC and their own PACs, because we do have to. That is the playing field, right? If it's not a spectator sport and you want to participate, money is part of that. It's sort of like the equipment of a football team. You have to show up with those goods.
50% of playing is showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Wow, we're just rolling.
We're going to the bumper sticker land.
Let's go. All the sports analogies.
No, you're totally right though, and like it's not anybody else's problem. The executives in this industry need to show up. Nobody else is going to handle it, right? And that's the only way we'll continue to grow. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
Before we let you go, I want to talk about energy storage briefly, because you mentioned that you started your current sort of tenure on the SEIA board through FlexGen and as the chair of our energy storage division. I feel like a lot of people talk about battery storage in particular as sort of maybe where solar was 10 years ago in terms of its market development and price decreases and all of that. Where do you see that playing a role in our policy and politics strategy moving forward? I mean, it's obviously a key piece of the sort of reliability argument and all of those sorts of grid enhancements. But how are we? Can we learn from our mistakes maybe of the past, and as we talk about solar and storage moving forward?
Yes and no, right? So I think we start off from a better understanding of what we want batteries to do than understanding what batteries can do. The way I've always described energy storage for the grid is they are a slinky. They allow the grid to expand and contract. Mm-hmm. The way that our grid was originally built is power plant on one side, homes and businesses on the other side. Right. And, from 7 to 9 a.m., put the energy into the homes. From 5 to 7 p.m., put on the energy in the homes. Everything else goes to the business, right? Like that. And it was very rigid, right? We knew where the demand was going to be when, at certain points. You back that up now, and everything has become more flexible. Our work schedules have become more flexible. When do we need energy for our cars has become more flexible. Where do we need the energy? Data centers all of a sudden come along with this massive, hyper-dense requirement. Plus, then we've added generating sources that are more decentralized, right? Solar on homes, wind farms, offshore wind farms, solar farms, which also carry with it, a predictable yet cyclical energy production. And batteries are there to allow the grid to sort of stretch geographically and, expand and contract. Store energy when there's too much of it, use it when there's not enough of it. Fundamentally, we're going to have energy storage batteries at every point of interconnect. We'll have it at the point of generation, solar and fossil fuel. We'll have it at the point of consumption. Every home and building is going to have some form of energy. We already have it, right? Our thermostats, we turn off the lights, right? Like we have energy efficiency features. Those are some form of energy storage consumption. But we haven't quite realized how much batteries can do for us. And this is where the regulatory, not the politics, but the regulatory side of our work comes into play. You can't drive behavior in in the energy, in the grid and the energy market, because it's a fundamentally regulated market. You can't drive any behavior without price signals. And so if you want people to do something, you have to give them a signal of, we want you to charge, we want you to discharge. The biggest difference, and this is where solar and batteries are finding itself into a new capital source. Solar projects are financed based on steady, predictable cash flows, contracted revenues for a long period of time. Batteries are fundamentally a merchant asset. You can put contracts around it, but it's a fundamentally merchant asset, right? So it's actually more oil and gas type money that wants to invest in batteries. But there's a new category, people that invest in solar and storage projects. So this is where it's exactly like solar in 2010, where we're just trying to figure out how do we do financial structures?
Yeah.
What financial innovations from a structuring standpoint are we putting into it? We've skipped from 2010 to 2020 in batteries based on how much we're investing. We went from, solar projects were $5 million, $10 million. In batteries, they're $100 million plus already. Cost is coming down, so that's going to drive the unit basis, but growth is going up. But we haven't figured out the business models yet. So right now, everyone's still doing there's 20 different companies that all offer the same combined service, but they each just want to do one piece of the 20 things, right? So and in solar, we've all become hyper specific, right? FTC Solar makes a single axis tracker. That's what we do.
One company, one job.
One company, one job. We don't make our own steel. We have our own ecosystem. If you go back to solar 2010, there was module companies making trackers and doing construction and financing all under one umbrella. That's where batteries are on the business model side. We need, that evolution to happen. People get good at some things, and that's all, going back to our original first point is it's underpinned by sustainable demand. If we have sustainable demand, sustainable price signals that drive sort of a business model need, then batteries will find itself sort of catapulting on the business model side. Because right now you have hardware companies making software.
Right.
And implementing those things together in a way that doesn't make any sense. And we all know it, but everyone's just like, I still have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because every time we talk about market forecasts for storage, it's a hockey stick up, right? And it's I've never heard that perspective before. But it makes a lot of sense that 10, 15, 20 years ago, one company was doing all the things. Now there's a centralized product, and it'll be really interesting to see how long it takes the storage industry to evolve, because it's going to grow faster than the solar industry did.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's sort of a bit of an accordion with that too, because I feel like there's some of the consolidation and then decentralization of products in a lot of different industries, and I'll be interested to see where that goes. And both will storage and solar remain kind of separated industries? How much connectivity will there be between them on the business side? Because obviously there's a ton of opportunity to pair them together, but how much will those services be separated? It's going to be an interesting thing to see moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're absolutely intertwined with each other. They make each other better, right? So, when I took the role as the chair of this energy storage division, the mandate here is energy storage growth allows for solar energy growth.
Yep.
And allows for expansion of solar energy value.
Mm-hmm.
Solar, when you make your money on solar when you make the investment, and then you operate to make sure you've hit those goals. Batteries have upside, right? So you make a financial investment, flexibility and resilience can have a lot of upside. 2 years ago in Australia, batteries made 90% of their revenue based on charging on negative electricity rates.
Mm.
So it was actually, they were making more money charging than they were discharging, because that's the flexibility that the grid needed.
Mm-hmm.
It was, hey, we'll pay you to take this excess capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But then that changed, right? So then demand growth happened. There was less oversupply of demand. There was more retirements of power plants. So that's the evolution that energy storage sort of allows. But you don't have to make that call on day one with batteries. operate it. It's sort of you're running a hotel instead of running a long-term rental, to sort of borrow from the real estate industry, because every day you can sort of adjust your pricing structures. That's why price signals are so important. That's why the ISOs and RTOs and FERC play a big role. NERC plays a huge role, right? Cybersecurity plays a ton of role, because now all of a sudden it's the digital device in what is otherwise an analog sort of market and like physical environment.
Yeah, well, I feel like we could probably geek out about all this all day, but just to sort of wrap things up, what maybe going back to what you were sort of saying at the beginning about sort of the long arc of your career and where we sit here in 2024 versus where we were back then, like what's your message to our listeners who are thinking about, maybe they're at year one of their solar career and trying to, no one has a crystal ball, but what do you want to say to folks who are starting out in the industry and maybe looking at 2025 with a little bit of uncertainty, and where do you hope that we're going to be 19 years from now?
Well, I'll definitely still be in the solar industry. Look, and it's interesting because I started when I was, obviously, it was my quasi first job coming out of college, and I had the benefit of, there's it's a big market. There's a lot of jobs in the solar industry, but it's still fundamentally a small industry, right? And but I sort of grew up with a lot of people, but there's always been, a group of folks that were here the 19 years prior to me starting. Right. There's not as many than there is now that have, but there are some leaders, and I really look up to them. And one thing I took for granted back then is they had a perspective of this is how it was and this is how it's evolved, right? When I look at the energy storage market, for example, I'm like, this is exactly what happened in solar, right? I can tell you the solar farm in Florida was built where one company did everything and it didn't make sense then, but now we're doing the same thing with batteries. So I kind of sound like an old curmudgeon in that way. Yeah. But I would say just because it's a big market, I write this newsletter. I started writing it 12 years ago and sent it to 37 people, right? And people ask me all the time, like, why do you still write this thing? And I arguably write a lot less now than I used to. I'm also, pick less fights than I did 10 years ago, as some folks around CEO would know. But, that was a quasi risk, and I was learning on the fly, and you learn how to build relationships. It's honestly, I'm the easiest person in the solar industry to get in touch with because it's a free newsletter and you can hit reply and say, what do you think of this? And it's shocking how few new people that have gotten into the solar industry that take advantage of me or even like other leaders. Like, we want to cultivate and help people get farther along in the solar market. And maybe it's the whole remote work, or it seems daunting, like I can't reach out to some of these folks. I would ask for more of that to happen. I recently, I had a peer on the SIA board. We're in a business meeting unrelated to the board, and I was like, you should bring. There was an intern in the meeting. I'm like, you should bring the intern to the board meeting. Like, you're,
yeah, why not?
Bring someone new, give them some exposure to what this is. Like, don't make it feel. And I think if more people showed up, then they would feel like I should get other people involved in the process. But 20 years from now, look, I think 20 years from now, if the trajectory holds, which I fully expect that it will, innovation is continuing. It amazes me what our engineering team and other engineering teams continue to come up with. As soon as you think you've run out of ideas, they come up with new ones. The innovation will continue, but we're going to be talking about hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. We've long crossed the thresholds of when the CEO of every major Wall Street bank thinks about solar tax credit as cute. Like, this is a core part of their business that they're making a lot of money on. Law firms think about energy storage and solar energy as a core part of their business and needing a real practice. because it's real money. And the same thing with steel suppliers and, silicon providers, et cetera, right? Like it's a real market. And I think the same thing is true with politicians. I mean, just look at where the solar factories are that have been built over the last couple of years. They're kind of everywhere. And almost everyone in America now knows someone that works in solar on both sides of the aisle, right? Like, I mean, everyone thinks, at least in my family, people always think that it's like, oh, it's all Democrats that work in the solar industry. I'm like, absolutely not. I will show you my LinkedIn, and there's plenty of both thoughts on, and because fundamentally solar is a bipartisan, and I've generally tried to get the Wall Street analyst community to like tone down the hot takes. I think my headline on Solar Wake Up today was everyone's got hot takes. And because politics and policy, the policy will have if we get involved and we tell a good story.
But then, you said it yourself though. Capitalism will drive demand.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't 100%. Matter what color you are. It does not matter what a party affiliation you have. If there is money to be made, money will be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, for better or worse. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to cheerlead on that topic, but the bottom line is like that's a real thing.
I don't think there's a single politician in America at any level that, given the opportunity, wouldn't want the data center in their district.
Right. Absolutely.
And if they want the data center to be in their district or the factory to be in their district, then you have to give folks both the demand for the output of that factory or the demand for the computing power and the energy access so that it can be powered. And I think that's what it comes down to is what do you want? And then what are the ingredients you need in order to execute on it?
I think that's as good of a end note as we're going to get, but
we'll take it.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Anytime.